Welcome, Karen. Okay, so today's session will be in English because we have a guest from Switzerland. That's Peter Brugger. And in this tech talk, we will be talking about business model innovation. Peter is an expert at implementing and designing new business models. Right now, he's the managing director at the Business Model Innovation Lab. This lab was born as a spin-off at the University of St. Gallen at Switzerland. And we're really happy to learn from you in this session, Peter. So are you ready?
Absolutely. Are you ready?
Yes, we are, always.
Good, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. As I already told Natalia and Mariana, apologies already in advance. I have my 2.5-year-old daughter in the room next to me. So there might be a moment where she's running and screaming. Don't worry, should be normal under normal circumstances. Or if I go outside afterwards, maybe she has painted the whole floor. Could all happen, but we're gonna manage. Thank you very much for having me. I think Natalia already said most of it. I'm the managing director of this Business Model Innovation BMI Lab. We are a spin-off of the University of St. Gallen, that is the leading university for management practices, but particularly also innovation in Europe. And back in 2011, there was a big research going on with regards to innovation. And from that came then the topic of business model innovation and how to develop a systematic approach to this topic for corporates. And after this research was done, the BMI lab as such was generated in order to support the research and the university in actually bringing this knowledge and this process into the business world. And I've been there from the very start of it and have developed business models with corporates in nearly every industry that I'm at least aware of, including tech manufacturing, but also agronomy, ITC, insurance, fast-moving consumer goods, banking, whatever you want. There's we really have been able to go into a lot of different locations and in different industries to explore what business model innovation can do. I'll start the session with a question to you, and please, if you like to respond in the chat by writing your answer to it. I'll start with this question. What do you think was Apple's market share by volume of the total smartphone industry in Q4 2019? It's a bit older, but it still holds true also in 2021. What do you think? How much was their market share? See, 20%, 35%. Yeah, you're pretty close. If we look at it, it's 30%. So 30% of the sales have been done by Apple, the rest by their competitors, Samsung, Huawei, and the likes. What do you think, however, was their profit share of the total smartphone industry? 30% is the sales. What is the profit share that Apple could generate? What do you think? Yeah, here we have different opinions, 38, 90, 70%, something in there. It is currently, or in end of 2019, it was 72%. It is currently a little bit below that number. It's around 65% today. But you can see that there's a huge difference between their actual sales and the profit they could generate. The reason for this is not only a good product, which is, however, not necessarily superior to other products in the market. It is not only the brand, which of course is good, but not better than others. When you look at it from the perspective of how it was in 2015, you could see that explains quite well why they are so successful still today. 2015, you had your traditional hardware providers in this industry. So the companies that created smartphones like a Samsung, Huawei, or LG. And next to it, you had your operating system providers. That were building Android, for example, Google, or Microsoft that had its Windows phones. And still at this time, only one company was able to combine both parts of it. So having both a hardware and a software component towards another. And this was what made Apple back in the day different from the others, but also more successful. But why is that? Why does this combination bring them more value? If we look at it from the perspective of a business model, you can see that they were the only company in this industry that was able to create a whole ecosystem around its products. In the center of attention, there's the hardware, there are the iPhones as such. But they were able to generate revenue for the company by offering digital goods through iTunes or through the App Store, from which they would always generate additional money. They would actually get money through advertising, through offering information from their customers to themselves, but also to third parties. And they had a combination of different go-to-market strategies that was superior to all the others in the market. Very much focusing on online retailing. So saying my normal buyer of my phone will buy it online, which they were the first ones to really understand that this is the new way to go, but also having these offline retailing options. And probably if you have an iPhone, you have experienced when you were in a bigger city that there are always there's always a lot of traffic in front of these Apple stores, simply due to the fact that people like to enter these stores because they look good and you feel prestigious when going inside. So they were very much able to build a whole lifestyle around their products and generating money from each and every step along the way, which no other smartphone provider was able to do. Today, we see that they're actually not as dominant anymore. But on the other hand, we see that all the other companies have actually tried to copy this system. So today we see that a couple of companies have left the industry, but all the others are going towards this integrated business model that has all of these aspects enclosed in order to compare themselves better to Apple. And what we see today is that they're actually having a case. So the pattern that was generated in the beginning by one player in the industry has been reapplied by the rest of the industry. And this is a common thing that we will discover throughout this presentation, that this is very helpful in understanding how to actually create a new business model by looking at other companies from the same industry or from different industries, understand the logic of what makes them so successful, and then applying this same concept to yourself. Business model innovation now creates sustainable competitive advantages. And we have looked quite closely at the maturity and the development stages inside of different industries to understand exactly where is competitive advantage generated. And we can see in nearly every industry that it always starts with product innovation. Having a competitive or a superior product makes a company more successful in the starting point of that industry. Once all companies that are still in this industry have comparable products, you try to differentiate yourself through processes. You're trying to make your supply chain more efficient. You're trying to be as cost efficient as possible. And this is sort of the war that goes on after you cannot really compare, after you can compare products to each other. But also here you see the limitations. At a certain stage, you see that everybody more or less can do the same who is still present in the industry. And this is the point where new business models and business model innovation becomes so increasingly important, to really find something different, something new that no other player in the industry has. We have made this, this picture in 2011. What we see today is a shift towards the left. So we see that business model innovation is actually becoming increasingly important at an earlier stage of every industry. So whenever products are developed, the most successful companies, or most innovative companies, are actually taking care of their business model as one of the first things they do. You can have more success with having a not superior product, but a superior business model. Because in the end, it is about solving a customer need, not about creating the best product that exists in the market. This is also something that we see more and more coming up in the smartphone industry, where everybody is trying to make their phones better with 5 or 10 cameras to have the photos that are slightly a bit better. This is not how you compete today anymore. It is really more about understanding, well, how do I solve a real issue for the customer? In the future, competition will not take place between products and companies, but between business models. And this is something that you should remember, that you should have in mind. This was also a comment that was made in the early 2000s, so it was already clear back then. But today, this situation is already here. We are talking about competition between business models, and this will become even more important in the future. But why do companies lose the race against newcomers, new players in the market? Well, coming back to our smartphones, we actually see that one of the main players that was here, and this is already my daughter, having her little situation. Let's see if she wants to join us as well. You can actually see that Nokia is a good example of a company that has lost out throughout the time. If we look at this picture here, we see that until 2010, Nokia was actually the dominant player in the market for smartphones. And then something happened. Nokia was actually losing out, and other players like Apple and Samsung were able to compete. And I really like this comment here of the former CEO of Nokia that said, we didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. So still at this point, they weren't really understanding what had happened. But it was actually quite clear. They had misunderstood the actual situation in the market and focused completely on products rather than on the customer needs, not understanding that the smartphone and its ability to bring people into the internet and give them a lot more opportunities than just being on a phone, that was actually more important to them than having the fastest or the most robust phones. And this problem of not understanding your customer and trying to build something that is actually not important anymore, this we have seen throughout industries and throughout time. And here you see a lot of different examples, mostly companies from the Asian and European market, but you most likely will know a few of them. A few of them you will not know anymore, simply because they have already left the respective industries for quite a long time. But these were all companies that were incredibly successful at a certain point, but they didn't understand when they had to change their business model, when they needed to change their current situation in order to become successful. We have companies here like Toys R Us, who actually was one of the first companies that had an online shop for teddy bears and for children's games. But they didn't understand that a company like Amazon would be a good partner for them and said, we don't sell through you. Well, at a certain stage, it became clear that online sales through a central platform was the way to go and not having your own online store. Company like Blockbuster lost out against Netflix and other companies like this, like Disney, simply because they didn't understand that people just didn't want to buy or rent DVDs anymore. And this is the same concept that reapplies and reapplies, and it makes only sense because all of these companies were out of touch with their customers at the point where they started the downfall. Thus, it is really important to think very early at what a new business model or how the current business model is actually performing and understanding in how far this business model still corresponds with the reality in the market. If you don't cannibalize yourself, someone else will. It's a quote that is often said that this was Steve Jobs who said it. I don't think so. At least it doesn't seem that way. But still, it holds very true. And this is one of the main aspects why a lot of these companies have been so unsuccessful in innovating themselves. Because they said, well, my current system works. And in order to change my business model, I would need to change my company. I would need to change my organization. I would need to change my core competencies. That is good and fine. But if you know that there's an opportunity out there and you're not taking it, then somebody else will take it and will be successful and in the end eat you. So it is more sensible to stick with that analogy, to cannibalize yourself, so to eat your current business up and create a new one rather than letting somebody else do it and then not having anything in hand. But now the question, why is it so difficult to develop an innovative business model? We have seen that a lot of companies weren't able to do it. And one of the main aspects is this cannibalization issue, that you actually don't want to change your systems and your organization. But what else is there? One of the central points, and that is also one that I've already talked about a little bit, is that a lot of companies are unable to think customer-centric anymore and in business models as such. And it's quite interesting if you look at what innovation actually means, then it is the successful market introduction of a technical or organization novelty, not its invention, which means the product itself is important, but it's not something that makes a business innovative. It is actually only when you were successful in bringing it into the market, which is basically what the business model is, that something becomes really innovative. And even if you have a superior product, and there are a lot of very interesting documentaries on smartphones, to come back to our case that we have seen before, there was actually a company in the early 2000s that had created a smartphone already back then that was superior to the first iPhone. They had this very innovative product, but weren't able to bring it into the market. So in the end, nobody knows today about them, even though they were good in inventing things. So always keep in mind, the market introduction is the important point, not really the product. The product is necessary. Now, when we look at what a business model actually means, the University of St. Gallen understands it in these 4 dimensions. There are other views on it. The most simple one is from Harvard. They say it is the ability to create and capture value, which I find very interesting. So it's creating value for the customer and capturing value for the company. Here we have sort of tried to bring some more dimensions in it in order to make it a little bit more open and more clear. The first and most important dimension is the who dimension. So who is your target customer? Who are you actually trying to sell to? Second question is, well, what do you offer to this customer? How do you go about it? How do you go to him? And what are you selling him? The third question is, how is this value proposition created? Which partners do you need? What activities are necessary? What is needed in order to perform, to bring this offering that you want to bring to the customer to him? Go to market, but also the organization of the company. And last but not least, why is the whole thing profitable? So the value dimension. What is the revenue model behind it, and how do you capture value? Most startups are really good at this who and what dimension. So they're very close to the customer and they can build something that really matters. But they're bad at having the right partners, at being efficient in delivering the value. And they are mostly really bad at actually capturing value. They're bad at earning money. Corporates, on the other hand, are very good at these last 2 points. They are very efficient, they have a good supply chain, and they're mostly very good at also earning money. But what they have come out of touch with quite often is the who dimension, so the customer dimension, and also having the offering that really is needed in the market. Now, when we talk about business model innovation, every company has a business model. So if I would ask you, you would probably not have too many difficulties of providing me the status quo of how your business looks at the moment. Business model innovation means that you change at least 2 of these dimensions. So if you only change 1 dimension, then you either have a new revenue model, you have a new product, you have a new market that you attract, or a new process. But only if you change at least 2, you're actually going towards something that is really innovative, that is new to your industry or to your market. Now, an example for what a business model innovation can be. This is a drill hammer by a company that is situated in Liechtenstein, close to Switzerland. Hilti, it's called. They're one of the main producers and sellers of drill hammers. And let's see how they could actually create a business model innovation around drill hammers. If you look at the traditional drill producers, they actually all have a similar business model in common. Their main consumers are construction companies that need drills and holes for their construction sites. Their real customers are actually distributors, wholesalers that buy the drill hammers and then resell them to the construction sites. The main business for such a drill producer is selling single drills. And they do generally not have any maintenance. They are really concentrating only on the production and selling of these drills. And for that, they get a one-time high payment, and that is it. And their main innovation process is product related. They build better products and then sell them to the market. And whoever has the best product or has the cheapest price will be successful. And Hilti themselves asked themselves the question, well, is this really what the market wants? Is this what it needs? And they did an analysis and found out that it actually doesn't satisfy at all what the consumers actually want. We see here that the most pressing issues for them were reliability and costs. Broken drilling machines can cause heavy losses. Every day that you need to spend on a construction site more is actually very expensive. If you need to have a repair, mostly this repair is not anywhere close and it takes, again, a lot of time. Third aspect, which shouldn't be underestimated, is that quite a lot of these tools are stolen. So it's also expensive to rebuy or have an extra stock of these drills. These drills are very costly, and because they're so costly, there are fewer replacements, but you still need replacements in order to guarantee that the construction is actually going on. So they took on all of these points and they thought to themselves, well, what can we do? How can we create a business model that is different from the rest, that is actually satisfying these points? And what they came up with, the slogan for it was, customers actually do not want drill hammers, they want holes. It's not so important which drill hammer they have, as long as in the end there's the hole in the wall that is needed. So the customer and the consumer actually didn't change, but the offering changed completely from a sale of goods towards a drill fleet management, a leasing concept where the ownership would remain with Hilti, and they would give the drilling machines to the construction sites when they need it, whatever they needed, and where they needed them. And with this leasing system, they were actually able to bypass their distribution, so the wholesalers, and directly interact with the end consumers. But on the other hand, they also had to provide the maintenance services, which they previously did not, so an additional cost. They reduced their costs by not having to pay a margin to the distributors, but they increased their costs by having this full maintenance service that they needed to provide. Now in this new model, they would actually get leasing fees, which in the first moment is less than selling it, but they created a contract with their customers over 5 years, over 10 years, which would create a far stronger lock-in than before. And once a new generation of products would come out, the lease could be extended quite easily. And in the end, it would actually, the system makes more money than if they would sell their products outright. So today, they are very successful with this model in Europe, far more successful than their competitors, because they were the first ones to move in there, and all the other competitors now try to do the same, but they don't have the capabilities yet to go into this. So for them, they at least have a 10-year competitive advantage to all of their competitors in the market. The second challenge is to overcome the dominant industry logic. And this is something that you will be aware of, either from yourselves or from others inside of your companies, that there's a specific line of thinking and a specific line of reasoning inside of every industry. This is how it should be done. This thinking, however, prevents us from thinking outside of the box, from thinking differently. And it is a concept that is very natural. It's not something that only happens in your professional life, but also in your personal life. And a good example for this is this paperclip. And I would ask you again, could you tell me or write me into the chat, what could you do with a paperclip? What is a use case that you can do with a paperclip? The most obvious is to clip paper together, but what else could you do with it? Yeah, the classics. Open a door that is closed, reset a moment, open a smartphone SIM card slots, retrieve the chip from the iPhone. Exactly. So you'll probably come up with 2-3 different ideas. And this was one of the questions that was raised by George Land, a university professor at Harvard, who made a longitudinal study, so a study with the same people over time, who was asking young children questions like these paperclip questions in order to find out how creative they are and how divergently they were able to think. The more applications you could find for this paperclip, the more creative you were. And in this case, you had to come up with 10 different applications inside of 60 seconds. If you're able to do that, you would be a creative genius. Now, looking at the stats for 3 to 5 year olds, over 98% were creative geniuses. So they were able to think divergently, but very well. For the 8 to 10 year olds, it was already 32%. And you could see that school has already made them think in a specific way. 13 to 15 year olds only had 16% who were really creative. And by the time they were 25 or older, it was only 2% who could actually think divergently, which makes a lot of sense because in our lives, we need to be efficient in our thinking and in our decision-making process. So we rather take the obvious choice than to think completely out of the box whenever we have to decide something. If we would do that, we would actually have quite a lot of problems of getting anywhere. So it makes sense to have this, but it also shows us that we are not trained to be creative. We're trained to be efficient. And so how should we then develop a new business model or being innovative if we're actually not trained to do that? And this was the third challenge that the professors at the University of St. Gallen have then taken as the basis for the research that they've made. They said, well, there is no systematic approach to help people who are actually not creative to be creative. And in order to find out whether there was something that they could do, they actually spent more than 5 years of doing intensive research, analyzing over 250 successful companies that were doing, that were innovative in their industries, and checked if there was something in common or if you could deduce something from it. And what they found out primarily was this, which doesn't show you too much, but if you go closer, you can actually see that each of these lines, if you look at the red scripture, you see that each of these lines represents a specific business model. Here, for example, the peer-to-peer model. And if you now go and check this red line, you see that there's Napster, there's mobility car sharing, there's Craigslist, there's eBay, quite a lot of companies that are actually not all in the same industry, using the same business model and all of them being innovative. The conclusions that could be made from this were, one, that there are patterns of business models that were reapplied in different industries. So you could actually look at other industries and check if that pattern that they had applied could also be innovative or successful in your own industry. And the second information was that quite a lot of companies were not only using one specific pattern, but quite a few of them in order to become really innovative. Here for Amazon, you see, for example, that there are 6 different business model patterns that were brought together. Now, after having done all of this research, it was actually possible for us to bring that down to 55 basic patterns that explained over 90% of all the innovations that were happening in these various industries. This was in 2013. By 2020, because of digitalization, automation, the introduction of IoT, we have seen that there are new patterns emerging. And today we're talking about 60 patterns that we could really see being different, but reapplied in various industries. Now, what exactly is such a pattern? One of the most famous ones is called razor and blade. And it's termed after Gillette. It's based on having a base product that is sold at a very cheap price and consumables that are proprietary to this product that actually create a margin. So you always have to rebuy those consumables, and this is where the company makes money. We could actually see that the first company that we have analyzed, and probably there were quite a lot more before that, was the Standard Oil Company. Johnny Rockefeller, by then, 1880s, the richest man in the world, who had a saturated market for petrol in the US. And he knew that he couldn't really be more dominant there. So he decided to go to China with a ship full of petrol and petrol lamps to Beijing, actually. And there at the harbor, he was giving away for free those petrol lamps filled with petrol that could then be used, and created a new market there of people who liked those lamps and wanted to get more of it, and then getting the petrol also from him. Same system then reapplied by Gillette with the razors and blades, but the same concept also reapplied in a completely different industry by Hewlett and Packard, selling printers, where the printer even today is sold at a price that is actually below the production cost. And what they make money with are the cartridges that are used and reused in order to print something. Same concept reapplied a couple of years later by Nestlé with its Nespresso. Also here, the machines are sold cheaply. What they make money with are the little coffee cartridges. Also in the digital world, the same thing can be used. For Apple, it was iTunes. Here, the consumables were the songs that needed to be bought. You also had a product that was actually expensive. So Apple was even able to create a very, very powerful razor and blade where both sides would actually make quite a lot of money. Now, on the basis of these patterns, we created a whole methodology around it that would or will guide you from your status quo, from your company and your business model as it is today, to a new business model. The first step, is we call it initiation, is where you look at your own business model, you understand your own business model and also its weaknesses, and then check which players are coming into the market, what the ecosystem is, and what change drivers you can see, both customer needs or specific technologies that are taking place, regulations, laws, cultural developments that sort of make your current business model as it is probably not future-proof. And we then take this current business model and check by using patterns from other industries in how far these patterns from other industries could support or change the current business model to make it more successful. And whenever we do this, there's a lot of different ideas, some that are quite close to the current way of doing it, some that are very far away. To basically choose whatever fits within your strategy, and then go into a phase of validation, which we call integration, where you check this new business model and you check it for internal and external consistency. Internal consistency means you have to check whether there's this strategic fit and whether it's financially viable. So can it actually make money? This is where quite a lot of ideas or concepts fall or X'd, because even though they're very interesting to customers, they don't really make money for you. But you also have to check for external consistency, which means talking to customers, to consumers, to see how far they are interested in your concept. If they're not interested, the whole development process can be stopped immediately because it doesn't make sense to continue. This is, however, while this sounds very logical, this is the biggest pitfall in corporations when it comes to business model innovation. Either not doing this external validation because we don't like to talk to our customers because we're afraid of talking to our customers, or, and that is even more ignorant, ignoring when you get a bad feedback because you yourself like the idea. And this is where, even with a lot of companies that I've worked with, you have graves of money in the end that were a lot of money that was spent completely unnecessarily, simply because somebody in the upper management said, I actually like this idea. So really always take into consideration all the feedback that you get. Another important factor here is the concept that you initially create and then externally and internally validate is definitely never, 100% never, the concept that will eventually go to the market. This is simply due to the fact that you base it on assumptions, you base it on the knowledge you have, and with every validation step that you do with customers or others, the idea develops further, and this is exactly what it should do. So don't protect the idea, but rather let it go wherever this validation process leads it. This validation process is then the fourth step, implementation, the realization, which is all about testing and developing the concept from a mere concept to a prototype, to a product or to an offering that can be then piloted and introduced into the market. Test, try and learn, adapt, and eventually enter that into the market. These development stages, and then I'll close and I'll let you have questions for me. And these development stages, we were also able to systematically put into place. We always start with an idea or a concept. We come then in a problem solution fit development stage, where it's all about validating whether you've actually realized the problem that customers really have and whether they are interested in your solution. If they tell you that's not the case, then you go back to creating new ideas, or go back and develop another idea that you have already generated. If they say they really have this problem and your solution is interesting, then you come into the stage of product market fit, where it is interesting to develop a product that they like and understand which market is the first one to attract. Only then you can check the revenue model. And this is another pitfall that happens quite often, that you want to have a understanding of if people are willing to pay already at the beginning when you're developing a concept. While you can ask the question whether somebody is willing to pay at this very early stage, the answer is never true. Also here I can say 100%. Either they don't see the product and thus say they would never pay for it, or they say they will pay an enormous amount because it's actually not that they have to pay it right then and there. So the numbers that you get there are not useful for any business case calculations. Once you have a first product, you can actually check, does my revenue model work and for what prices can I do it? Once you've identified that, you go on into the value delivery stage, which is all about reproducing and scaling up, growing your offering, understanding if you can only do it once or if you can do it 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, and understanding exactly how the supply chain needs to work in order to provide this service or offering at a scalable manner. And then go for scaling and go for KPIs, because the other important factor is that these new business models tend to not have the same KPIs as your current business. And if you try to track them using your current KPIs, they will mostly lose because they're still very fresh, very young ideas. So what they concentrate on mostly, these new business models that are still very young, they concentrate on creating a bigger market share, creating and getting more customers involved, but not on profit, or probably at the beginning also not on revenue. So by trying to ask a new business model to be profitable in the first 2 or 3 years, you tend to diminish its potential, because it will never or rarely be comparable or competitive with your current products that you already have in the market for a longer period of time. With that, I'll hope that I haven't talked too much, but it seems to be exactly the 40 minutes that were planned. I would allow you to ask questions to me if you have any. I'll have a couple of more slides afterwards if these topics would come up, or I can just in general talk to you also about my experiences in developing new business models in corporates. Go ahead, I'm happy to share all the information I have.
Thank you, Peter. So if you have any question, you can write it on the chat, or just like raise your hand and open your mic. While we wait for the questions, Peter, I have one question for you. Thank you for sharing the importance of using business model innovation and also the framework that you designed. So my question will be, how the established companies can get started with business model innovation? So what are like your top 2 recommendations for them to start exploring new business models?
I think the first step is to create a burning platform, to have an understanding that change is needed. And this is something that shouldn't happen at the stage where everything is already burning, so you don't really have money to spend anymore, but it should happen at a moment of strength where you actually are comfortable in the market, and it's about expanding your possibilities, because that is the moment when you actually have the budgets to create something new. And then I would always start with, first of all, analyzing. So if we go back to this slide, analyzing your status quo and understanding, well, which opportunities are we missing? The way that we start is that we first do a desk research and some initial interviews in order to understand what are the opportunity areas for new business models. And once you have identified these opportunity areas, then you can make and this should be a small team that, however, has the potential to go further. And then you make a workshop, you invite more people, you invite people that you think are creative, you invite customers, suppliers, people that can actually bring something new to the table than just the people you talk to throughout the day. And you do one of these exercises. You take these patterns and you try to figure out, well, how could we use these patterns in order to create something new in one of these opportunity areas that we have identified. This is the first step. But quite often, and this is something that we have seen now over the last 6 or 7 years that I at least have been working in this field, while in the first years it was mostly about generating these ideas. Today, in quite a lot of companies, these ideas already exist. And it's actually more about bringing them on the road, on implementing them, finding out how to go further, testing them, validating them. If you're there, then it is more about creating this concept. You have an idea first, but you have to create a concept around it, the business model in all 4 dimensions, and then have a very, very clear understanding of where you want to go. So what exactly do you want to validate? And how much money do you need in order to validate it? In innovation, we talk about affordable loss rather than expected return. So it is not about making at this stage a business case over the next 3 years, I will make X money, but it is more about understanding how much money am I willing to spend in order to find out whether this idea has potential. And the numbers are very, very different for the 2 of them, because if you're thinking expected return, you'll try you already have to have the investment in the beginning for the thing that you're doing in 3 years. which is most often quite a lot of money. But if you're thinking in affordable loss, you can say, well, I spent a first $10,000 in order to understand completely, do customers want this? What is the problem of my customer? And only then, only after you have this validation, you budget the next round. And this makes, for these very distant models, or these ideas that are distant from your core business, makes a lot more sense.
And another question in line with that, Peter. So how do you make sure that the business model will actually be implemented? I mean, most of business models end up just on paper or on the business model canvas. So what can you recommend for the companies to actually test and implement the business models?
So what helps a lot is to have a it's a top-down and bottom-up approach. You need to have sponsors that are actually willing. So it needs to be a top-down decision that you're willing, or at least you have the ability to spend the necessary resources, be it budgets, time, people, to do it. If you don't have that, then don't start. Doesn't make any sense. If you're trying to somehow convince anybody in the company out of nowhere that they should give you 3 months of free time and a budget of, I don't know, $100,000 to create something new, that is very, very rarely happening. So rather decide as a company that you want to invest in this, that this is so it's a strategic decision, and then find the right people inside of the company that are willing to spend their time on it. The thing that we have seen in German companies in particular, that people working for these companies are afraid to go into these projects because of the potential that they could fail. And if they would fail, they don't think that they have any chance to go up in the inner hierarchy. So they don't want to do it. And you have to create a culture in which that is possible. And this culture is normally not created overnight, but it needs to be a program that is developed inside of the organization in which this is possible. You make it possible. And the other point that is important is that you need clear gates. You need some sort of a stage gate process. Doesn't need to be very formal, but an understanding. This is the first thing we need to do. This is the second thing we need to do. This is the third thing we need to do. Similar to these development stages, these are by definition stage gates. I first want to create the idea, then I check the problem solution fit, then I check the product market fit. For each, you will have some time and you will need some resources to spend. If you go through this, you know exactly where you stand at which time. And there's a higher possibility that it actually is then implemented in the end.
Okay, awesome. I want to make a quick pause. So, okay, I see, Jose Angel, you have one question. We can go with you.
Yeah, Peter, thank you for sharing this presentation to us. And I just have a question. I mean, regarding to the last thing you were commenting, what is the best practice you have seen, especially when you have a big company with a very strong, business model, and when you try to develop, a new business model?
Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, is the profile that people that you have running the actual business is for completely different to what you need to develop a new business model, right? And I don't know what is the best practices that you have seen. I mean, in terms of dedicating a certain team, to develop a new business model. I mean, in terms of the profile of the people, and probably you have different incentive for these people, and you can comment something in that.
Sure. So we have seen a lot of different shapes and forms to answer this question. And it really depends on the culture inside of the company. If you say that there are no employees that are able to do it simply because they're all believing in this current model and they don't want to change it, then it makes a lot of sense to bring somebody in externally. These entrepreneurs in residence, I think they're called in the US, where you bring somebody from the outside, you put them inside of your company, and he then develops new things for you, which can make a lot of sense. If you say, well, it is only about finding the right profiles in the organization, the right profile are these entrepreneurs who can think like an entrepreneur. So people that are able to be hands-on, that actually want to do something. Those are most likely people that are very fresh in the organization, that have spent 2 to 5 years inside of the organization. So they still haven't adjusted completely to the processes. They can still change something. And pair that with a sponsor inside of the company that can support whatever they're doing. Otherwise, when it comes to teams, they should be heterogeneous. So they should be diverse. You don't only want to have product managers in there, or you don't only want to have people that are all coming from the same specific topic area or the same specific product area, but rather try to bring different backgrounds together, because they tend to be more creative, even if they in the beginning tend to be more disruptive also inside of the group. They most likely come up with better results. But in general, I have to say that from the experience now that I've gained in this, you just need somebody who is willing to do the dirty work. Somebody who is wants to go to customers, who wants to talk to customers, who is more of a generalist in the sense that they can calculate the business case, or also are creative in finding a good value proposition, a nice slogan, and are able to talk to people. If somebody doesn't like to talk to people, that's the wrong business.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I believe we have space for one more question. I don't know if you can ask it directly or write it on the chat, and we can discuss it. If we don't have any more questions, probably Peter, you can share your last reflection and recommendation for us.
Good. Let's see. Is there still a question up there? Otherwise, yeah, my last reflection. It is tough. Business model innovation is not something that is easy to do. It is definitely the toughest project that you can do as a company, but it is very rewarding, because even if you don't come up with a new business model yourself, you have at least screened the area of possibilities. And at the end, you can say, well, either there is nothing that could be changed in my industry, which is very rarely the case, except if it's completely overregulated. And otherwise, you know already what will come in the next couple of years, either by yourself or by somebody else who is willing to invest the time and resources to do it. And I think with that, I can leave you.
Thank you, Peter. So I just want to tell you that we launched the pool for the session. If you can share your comments with us, that would be amazing. So we can keep improving this session for you. And Peter, thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge and experience regarding business model innovation.
Very welcome.
We will be happy if you can join us for another Tech Talk session anytime in the future. And well, good afternoon for you. And I hope you have a good day, team.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.